Good, Cathaoirleach. So I'm delighted to be able to speak briefly on this motion, the preservation of seaweed harvesting rights, brought forward in the names of my Independent for Change colleagues, Deputy Thomas Pringle and Deputy Catherine Connolly, and I'd like to congratulate them for this very timely and I think important motion. My colleagues, of course, are calling for a national strategy at last for the promotion of sustainable developments of our seaweed sector, ensuring that traditional seaweed harvesters are protected. They want to stimulate job creation among rural, coastal and island communities and undertake an economic analysis of the sector, and above all to regulate the sector in a fair and sustainable way. And of course the national strategy should also include the clear potential for the climate change benefits, of course, for the growth and promotion of this sector. So the motion rightly calls for the suspension of the granting of licences until such a strategy is published, and most importantly for the sole responsibility to be under the aegis of the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, where clearly it should be. I've learned that approximately 40,000 tonnes of seaweed is harvested in Ireland annually, with around 185 full-time equivalent workers or 400 part-time workers, and that the sector is valued at approximately €18 million per year, €6 million of which is for exports. And the current use, of course, of this wonderful natural resource include food, cosmetics, tasselotherapy, spa treatments, biomedicines and biotechnology. And one of our seaweed processing factories, of course, Aramara Cho, has been in existence since 1947, but was bought, of course, in 2014 by Arcadian Sea Plants, and is currently processing, I believe, 25,000 to 30,000 tonnes of seaweed products annually. It doesn't have its own harvesting licence, but it has applied for a licence to allow it to harvest up to 40,000 tonnes per year. And of course, there are fears that the company wants to use mechanical harvesting, and then the whole issue of sustainability of seaweed harvesting and traditional methods are the very key concerns of this debate, which Deputy Pringle and Deputy Connolly have brought to our attention. I note that there are currently 23 applications for seaweed cultivation sites and already 6 aquaculture grow-out sites with licences: Bantry Bay, Roaring Water Bay, Ventry and Kerry, Clew Bay and Mayo, and I know Bantry Bay in particular very well down through the years. So I believe Minister Creed has already reviewed the Independent Aquaculture Licensing Review Group report, and you may have referred to that earlier on, Minister. But when will that report be brought before the Dáil, and when will we have some action taken on it? I notice, of course, BioAtlantis in Bantry was approved, I think, for mechanical harvesting over a trial period of 10 years, but over a huge amount of 1,860 acres, and the grave concern, of course, in the Beara Peninsula and the surrounding countryside in relation to, people have submitted a petition to the Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government, and there was the call for a pause on that permit until we'd have proper consultation. I know that we've been talking a lot about the Foreshore Act 1933, and again I know the Minister has had his last chance to reply, but I just wonder why we're still operating off such ancient legislation down through the years. I mean, I remember asking Taoiseach Kenny umpteen times about aspects of the Foreshore Act in relation to wind turbines and so on, and it's incredible that we're still talking about that. The Joint Subcommittee, of course, on Fisheries, the report on promoting sustainable rural, coastal and island communities, which was published in January 2014, found that, and I quote, in the short to medium term, the two industries which these rural communities are likely to continue to have the most reliance on are inshore fishing, of course, and aquaculture. And we're still waiting, I think, some of the recommendations of that report to be even acted on. And of course, then the Joint Committee on Environment, Culture and the Gaeltacht published a report to the Committee on Developing the Seaweed Industry, of course, in May 2015, and put forward those 8 recommendations, which many of which, of course, echo the calls by my colleagues in the motion before us today. Most importantly, of course, recommendation 1 was for the adoption of a national strategy to promote the development of the seaweed industry, focusing in particular on the Gaeltacht and counties of the western seaboard. And all the other recommendations, which I have here in front of me, down to recommendation 8, they're all, in fact, would be very valuable regulations to have for this sector. So I strongly support the terms of my colleague's motion, and I believe there are, of course, useful exemplar regulations in countries like in the Canadian provinces. I noticed, for example, in British Columbia, there are conditions, strict conditions around harvesting, and indeed the Indigenous First Nations are consulted. Nova Scotia, similar kind of provisions. In Scotland, they have the Seaweed Cultivation Policy Statement. So the Minister has some work to do in this regard, but as it stands, I think I welcome warmly the confirmation that licence applications, which will remain on hold until there's full legal clarity for traditional harvesters who really need to be protected, and concrete moves by you, Minister, Minister to develop a national sustainable seaweed harvesting strategy. Thanks.